Going live. We're going to just quickly drop back a few lines before the Mishnah, just because I don't think I zetzed it right, like they say. So let me just bring this up the page. Okay, I'm just gonna read the Talmud itself. We're going back to Rav, just to make sure that we did this one right. Hold on. Okay. Amar Rav says like this. So we're at the top of the page of 5a. Megillah bismana korin. Amar Rav says Megillah bismana korin oisa afilu biyachid. If you're reading it in its proper time, even one who's alone, meaning without a minyan, can read the Megillah. Shlei bismana, but if you're out of its time, then it requires 10 people to read the Megillah. Rabasi says, Bein bismana, bein shlei bismana basara. Doesn't make a difference whether you have whether it's being read in its proper time or read in a different time, which we'll see again, of course, what that means. Then you always required to have 10. So, meaning to say, even if it's bismanoi, even if it's in a proper time, let's say the 14th falls out on a regular day and you read the Megillah, so you need to have a minyan. So though Rav himself says that you don't need a minyan if it's read in its proper time, you could read it alone. There was a situation where Rav was obviously lacking a minyan on its proper time. So in theory, he would just read the Megillah according to his own opinion, but he still gave reckoning to the opinion of Ravasi, meaning to say that he went and he searched the minyan. Okay, we did the Rashis and Tosfos on this. I just want to see go to the last part. Did Rav say this? Meaning, did Rav say that you can read the Megillah without a minyan on its time, and when it's not in its time, then you do require a minyan? So he says, Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel, the son of Shelas, said in the name of Rav, Purim Shechalias b'Shabbos, Erev Shabbos Manam. He said a statement like this, that Rav says that if Purim falls out on Shabbos, in the days of Kiddush HaChodesh, when we sanctified the moon, and we didn't have a calendar, it was possible for even the 14th to fall out on Shabbos. Today, that's impossible. It only will fall out on the 15th of Shabbos, possibly, which happens all the time, like last year. But Purim that falls out on Shabbos, Erev Shabbos Manim, the Friday is its time. So what does that mean, Friday is its time? Erev Shabbos Manim, what do you mean Friday is its time? For Shabbos Manim, its time is on Shabbos itself. You could say the laws are not, we don't do everything on Shabbos, but you can't say that its time changes. The time is the 14th, that doesn't change. Elalav, so what did that statement mean? This is what we understand the statement to mean. Shaloi bizmanim kizmanim. That when you read it in a different time, because you have to push off certain things on Shabbos, like we learned, we can't learn we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. Mazmanim afilu b'yachid, av shaloi bizmanim afilu b'yachid. So not that Rav would agree with Rav Asi that you need a minyan both privately and publicly, but on the contrary, even if you're reading this shaloi bizman, you still don't need a minyan, because that's what it means, that Erev Shabbos Manim. So that's what the Gemara thinks to say, that all the laws, whatever applies in its time, now applies when it's not its time, meaning that you could also read b'yachid. That's what the Gemara thought to say. So how do we know that Rav? So why are we saying that Rav said that if it's not in its man, you need a minyan? What's interesting in the Havamina of the Gemara, Havamina means in the thinking of the Gemara, is here we have a statement from Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rab Shmuel, the son of Shelas, in the name of Rav. And then we have a statement that Rav himself said and then acted on it also to make sure there's a minyan even bismanoi. So why would we think that someone who else is quoting Rav is contradicting what we know that Rav said himself and acted on? So the Gemara said, no, that's not what Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shmuel, son of Shelas, means. What does it mean that Rav was saying that Friday is its time? Loilini mikra Megillah basar, not to say that we do or don't need a minyan to read the Megillah. Elamai erev Shabbos man, and what does it mean erev Shabbos is its time? Afukaimi de Rebbe. This is to say that we don't go according to what we learned last week and what Rebbe says. What does Rebbe say? That Rebbe says that once the cities push off mim kaimam yitchel yem haknisa, that if they don't read it on its proper time, then they read it on the Thursday. So he's coming to say that we don't go according to that opinion. The Erev Shabbos manimhu, that if Purim falls out on Shabbos, we don't push it back to Thursday. We push it back to Friday. And Friday becomes its time, not Thursday. Okay, we learned this all last week with the Rashi. Let's start from the Mishnah. I just wanted to zets it properly, and all the laws and the questions and do we need a minyan, don't we need a minyan? So we discussed that all last week, and now we're going to start with this new Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows. Okay, so we have three categories. We have the category of walled cities in the times of Joshua. We have the category of the villages that can read 11, 12, 13. But obviously, when is the actual mitzvah? The main day is the 14th, like we all celebrate today, aside for certain cities in Eretz Yisrael. So what is a city that in the times that we kept according to the custom of the villages and the cities, that they have to read on the 14th and they cannot backdate their dates to the 11th, 12th, and 13th? What's the definition of Ir Gedolah, a big city? That's not a village. Means what defines a village? What separates a city from a village? Kol sheish be'asar batlanim. A city that has to have 10 idlers. Pachis mikan harizek kfar. If the city doesn't have 10 idlers, like we learned before, there's different opinions on what's the idlers. If the idlers are people that are available, or people that sit a whole day, people that make a min. That basically, it's based on the idea Baruch Hu doesn't want to walk into a shul and see that the time of the minyan has come and there's no minyan. So therefore the city would pay people that belong to that were supported by the fund of the city, by the tax of the city, and their job was to be available to sit in the yeshiva, sit in the Beis Medrash, in the Beis HaKnesses, other things that you could say that they were required for when we need a minyan. They're the available minyan. That's a sign of a large city. If it doesn't have 10 batlanim, 10 idlers, then it's a kfar. Okay, so I just want to say, the question goes like this. What about a village? Everyone knows that a village is you don't need the Mishnah to teach us what a village is. If you have a city is a metropolitan, a village is out there where people have live separate from each other. Where there's a village where mainly people support themselves on the fields and the farming. And we've already discussed that one of the reasons is because they provide the cities. But a city that's lacking, if you have a large city that's lacking 10 batlanim, 10 idlers, they don't give benefit. There's a benefit that the villages give to the city. The city that's lacking 10 idlers doesn't have that benefit. The people are not farming just because they don't have 10 idlers. So the benefits of why we let the people say it early, so they should come in and bring the water and bring the food, all those things are going to be lacking in a city that doesn't have 10 idlers. So the question is like this. The Ritva says, a kfar, a village. What happens if you have a village and the village has 10 idlers? There's a small village, but they're a wealthy village or a diligent village, and they take it upon themselves. They want 10 idlers in their village, although they're definitely not a city, and they have all the provisions. They do everything, whatever is required or expected from a village. They define that, but they also have 10 idlers. When would they read? Do they have to read then on the 14th, or they're still allowed to read on the 11th, 12th, 13th? So the Ritva says, She'im yesh b'yasara batlanim, that a kfar that has 10 idlers is dinikir. Then it's like a city and it has to read on the 14th. But the Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe, brings in the name of the Rishon LeZion. It's a sefer called Rishon LeZion, not just the city. That the kfar la'olam maktim liyem haknisa. It doesn't work that. A village, even if it has 10 idlers, it still is able to read 11, 12, and 13 because obviously the benefits what we need the city for, the villages for, so they should be able to bring the water, etc. So he says, what about it? But now the Ritva goes in the other case. If the city doesn't have 10 idlers, so it's a village, and they could read on Yom HaKnisa, Afal Pi Shalai Shaykhatam L'Sifik Mayim Mazon. Although they don't have the benefits, they don't provide the benefits of the village. They're not going to bring water or food because they don't have. That's not what they do. But nevertheless, because they don't have 10 batlanim, they don't have 10 idlers, so therefore they never gather unless it's Yom HaKnisa. You can't rely on a minyan to come together on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday or on a Sunday because they don't have the 10 idlers. So therefore, when the people try to come to the minyan is Monday and Thursday. There's many cities that have minyanim only on Mondays and Thursdays when it's Yom HaKriya, till today. So he says, and that's why they would read the Megillah on those days. Why? Because otherwise, if they're going to read it on the regular day, the whole preoccupation of getting a minyan will disrupt the Simchas Yom Tov and it will take up time of Purim. So for that reason, the Sfas Emes says, the Ritva says that even a city that doesn't have the benefits of providing the food of a village, nevertheless, they also would read on 11, 12, 13. So he says like this, Rabbi Steinzat says, a city that does not have 10 regular idlers in the synagogue has a halacha of a village. During the period when the reading of the Megillah for the villagers was advanced to the day of assembly, it was advanced in these places as well. So says the Rambam, Sefer Zemanim Hilchas Megillah, Laws, chapter 1, Law 8. Okay, so I just want to say, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure if this footnote comes up a little later, but it's brought down that today, any city that has a minyan, always, even if they don't have 10 idlers, that's considered 10 idlers. I mean, if you have a reliable minyan, that the city knows that at least Shachris, there's always going to be 10 people for Shachris, and you don't have to wait too long, so then that is considered a city that has 10 idlers, even because, for instance, Seattle, right? I don't know if there's 10 idlers in Seattle that don't do anything and are paid to be there for the minyan. They have some, maybe a few people, but to say that there's 10, and Seattle's a big city. But there's plenty of minyanim in Seattle that are daily. So the opinions today is today a city that has a minyan, that's enough. That's considered a city of 10 idlers. I saw that somewhere, so I make sure that okay. The Mishnah continues. Be'elu, there's a problem. The word be'elu is plural. So what's be'elu? We're only talking about Purim. So the commentaries address this question. What's the Mishnah say be'elu? You could say various different scenarios of Purim. But whenever the scenario is, Purim is a holiday that we backdate the mitzvahs. Meaning, if Purim falls out on 14th and Shabbos or 15th and Shabbos, we do, like we said, Thursday. We never push it off till Sunday. Although Sunday we do sometimes the 16th, some of the mitzvahs, but we're going to learn that's a shaila. It's a big question about, it's not so simple that we do this. I mean, there's a Purim Shul, which again happens almost every 4 years or so, on average. I'm not sure the math, but that's how it works. About every 4 years or so, Purim falls out on the 14th falls out on Friday, and the 15th falls out on Shabbos. So if the 15th falls out on Shabbos, so the rule is that we do Friday Megillah, Shabbos is we do Al Anisim and Nikreis Torah. We read about Amalek, and on Sunday we do Matanos Lavyonim. We do Mishalach Manas, and we do Sudas Yamtiv. We do always Matanos Lavyonim, gifts to the poor. Always happens around Megillah. We read, but so the question is, how do you push it off? It says you're not supposed to push it off, so it's not so simple. But let's just continue. Avazman Atzei Kainim, there's other mitzvahs that fall out on Shabbos, and what do we do if it falls out on Shabbos? For instance, the wood that was brought for the Mizbeach. What's the wood that was brought for the Mizbeach? It's an amazing thing. It's a huge lesson in life, B'chlal. In the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Jewish people came back from Babylonia, to build a second temple. They say that the people it's only 70 years. There were those who lived in both temples. There was those who saw the first temple when they were younger, it was destroyed. They came back and they saw it rebuilt in the second time. You say this, the people that saw the first temple cried when they saw the second temple. The second temple went through many levels of reconstruction, but their initial temple was done very poorly. They didn't have money. The utensils didn't have gold, mamish. It was very simple. So they didn't even have money to buy the wood. So families donated the wood. And because they donated the wood when things were poor, they were given that schus. We know that there's the whole chaf tevis, chaf av is this family gave and that family gave. A lot of the families were families from the tribes of Yehuda, from the family of David, the sons of Yoav, the sons of David. So they gave wood and they kept the tradition that even when things were in abundance, they still had the schus. Because they gave it when it was poor, they kept the schus, even though then the fund of the temple was strong enough to buy their own wood. But there was a Yom Tif and it was a whole thing. So what happens if the switching time falls out on Shabbos? When does the new family start to give the wood? Do they start on Friday or they start on Sunday? So it says, Zman Atzei HaKohanim, or if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. When do we fast? Do we fast on Friday or do we fast on Sunday? We all know that we fast on Sunday, right? Chagiga. If Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, so you're not allowed to bring the Chagiga on the Shabbos. You have to wait till Yom Tov to bring the Chagiga, because you're not allowed to slaughter you don't have to slaughter the Chagiga on Shabbos. So therefore, when do you do it? This is according, we're going to see whose opinion this is. So when do you do it? You would do it on Sunday. Hakel also. Hakel is the mitzvah that every 7 years on the 7th after the sabbatical, the beginning of the 8th year, everyone gathers in the temple, mitzvahs hakel. And everyone gathers and you have to have the children and the infants, everyone has to come. So you can't do it on Shabbos. We'll see the reasons why you can't do it on Shabbos. So when do you push off the hakel? Now the question is, when is the hakel? Some opinions is the hakel is on the first Motzei, the first night of Sukkot, or it's Motzei, the last day of Sukkot. But if what happened to that day falls out on Shabbos, ma'achrin, all those cases of the wood donations that falls out on Shabbos, when you have to switch families, or Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, or Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, and we have the question of the Chagiga sacrifice, or the Hakel falls out on Shabbos, ma'achrin, we push it off to Sunday, v'lay makdim, and we don't go backwards to Friday. Okay, let's see Rashi. Rashi explains the cases. Only the cases of Purim, which is again, it says the word be'elu, which is plural, which is questionable. Nevertheless, we're talking about the various scenarios of when Purim that we have to go back. So we only go back, we don't go forward. But what about the time that the wood was brought for the kohanim and the people? Amr b'sechtes Tainis. We learned in the Sechtes tractate of Tainis. Shahayu mishpachas shayisrael shekavu alehem yomim b'chol shana lahavi eitzim lamigdash. There was a set times that certain families that had the merit, the schus, again because they supported in the bad days, they kept the schus, and that was a big Yom Tov. It was a holiday. It was an opportunity. It was a day of celebration for that family, that they brought the wood for the Beis Hamikdash, the tzarech hamaracha for the sacrifices, for the marach is the fire, umevin carbon eitzim iman, and the part of the celebration was they brought what's called the carbon eitzim, the sacrifice of the wood. Im choli is b'Shabbos, if that switchover day falls out on the Shabbos, ma'achrim liyei then they do their whole, they start and the carbon eitzim all it's done on Sunday. V'chein Tisha B'Av shechol is b'Shabbos, if Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos, again that happens all the time. And the Rashi adds v'huadin liyudzayim b'tamas shivasar b'tamas ulasar b'tevis asar b'tevis. We know there's the famous Abu Deram that says be'etzem yom hazeh. The fact that it says be'etzem yom hazeh on this day, and it says be'etzem yom hazeh on Yom Kippur, we actually learn according to Abu Deram, he disagrees with Rashi. And we know this is a famous thing that if Asar B'Tevis would fall out on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos. But Rashi is not of that opinion. Rashi holds that the same thing applies to the 17th of Tammuz and the 10th of Teves. Why did we mention Tisha B'Av more than the 10th the 17th of Tammuz, and the 10th of Teves. Mishum de Huchbelu Boitaris, because a lot of things happened on Tisha B'Av. Both temples were destroyed. The Jewish people stayed 40 years in the desert. Although there's also more than one thing happened on the 17th of Tammuz, and we list them in the Slichos. But Tisha B'Av is known to be a bad day, and remained a bad day throughout our history. That Tisha B'Av was a bad day. Tehuchbelu Boitaris, v'akol misanim, by everyone fast. Al v'shar tzaymis, but the other fasts. Amrina, we say in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Ratzim Misanim, Ratzim Misanim. Okay, this has to be. This is not a halacha class, but there's the opinion in Rosh Hashanah that says that Tisha B'Av always stayed a fast. The other fasts, Ratzu Misanim, Ratzu Misanim. If you want to fast, you fast. If you don't want to fast, you don't have to fast. So we'll see what that means. We'll bring down some of the commentaries again, but this is not a halacha class. Obviously, we all fast on these days as well. Okay, what is the chagiga? What does it mean, the chagiga that has to get pushed off to Sunday? So what happens if Yom Tov falls on Shabbos? Then we have to push off the chagiga sacrifice. The chagiga sacrifice is the holiday sacrifice. The Shabbos sacrifices we always sacrifice on Shabbos. That's a set time. The question is, slaughtering and doing a sacrifice on Shabbos involves doing things that are forbidden on Shabbos. So what things override the Shabbos are done on Shabbos anyways. So the Mishnah quotes over here the chagiga, the holiday sacrifice, and remember the holiday sacrifices include shlamim, and then there's also the chayvus riyah, which is an oila. We'll see that there's a machlokes. Let's see what that means. A riyah means you have to bring the sacrifice of coming to the holiday. That's a burnt sacrifice. That there's no eating. The chagiga is only parts of it are burnt. The remainder is eaten by the family. That's their Yom Tov meal. So l'machar, it's done on the Sunday. Because you don't have to do it on the Shabbos. You could do it on this. We know that in the times of the temple, not everyone even did it on the first day. You had the whole 7 days of the holiday to bring your holiday sacrifices. So because you have tashlumim, it's called tashlumim. You have the days that you can make up all 7 days, and that even applies to, we're going to learn Shavuos. Even though Shavuos is a 1 day Yom Tiv, we have the 7 days that a person could bring their sacrifice for the holiday. So because you don't have to bring it on Shabbos, you could bring it on Sunday, you bring it on Sunday. But Friday, we don't bring it. V'chein hakel, also the hakel celebration, which is on the sabbatical. Everyone would gather and hear from the king the reading of the Torah. It says, hakel etzam shahayi b'shnas b'shana rishayna shel Shemitah. So Rashi is of the opinion, when did the hakel happen? On the first year of the sabbatical, meaning the 8th year, means you count 7 years, 6 years. The 7th year is the sabbatical. The beginning of the first year of the new sabbatical, which is the end, the motzei of the previous sabbatical, on the Sukkot, we have the reading and the celebration of hakel. Shnas hakel was last year, I think, a few years ago. So we have when do they actually do the ceremony of hakel? So Rashi says b'matzah yom tov achron, at the end of the last holiday of Sukkot. K'dechsiv miketz sheva shanim b'moed shnas hashmita, at the miketz, at the end of 7 years of the Shemitah. K'damrin Masechta Sota shahaya hamelach, that what happened in the hakel? The king Korah b'Torah would read the Torah, Sefer Mishnah Torah from Devarim. V'chol am chayvim lavei lahavi estapam. And you can't just come alone, you have to bring your infants. Everyone has to come to the reading of the king, when the king reads in the temple on the Motzei Chag, on the end of Sukkot. You can't do that on Shabbos. Because there's different opinions, but one of the opinions is because what happens if you can't carry the kids? So therefore we do it on the Sunday. The Gemara Yishalmi quotes, so the question is, Rashi says efshar, you can't do it on Shabbos. The Rashi doesn't say why you can't do it on Shabbos. Some people learn that Rashi learns because of the taf, because of the children. Or he continues what the Yishalmi says. The hadla of din le'b'Shabbos, why don't we do it on Shabbos? Because what they did was, in the courtyard of the temple, they built this big stage. There's a whole operation, right? They put up a big stage of wood for the king to go on to read the Torah, Ba'azara, in the courtyard. And he would sit and he would read the Torah. or brachinan hasam leave them yasmal, mashani dechikale azara. Okay, so the question is, so why can't so according to Yerushalmi, the problem is that you're not allowed to build on Shabbos. You're not allowed to build. You're not allowed to build the stage on Shabbos. What's the obvious question? The Gemara says, do it on Friday. Make the beam on Friday. So he answers, Mishum dechekelai la azara. It crowds the azara. It's taking up space. Most of the opinions is, there's two reasons what that means. One reason is because then people think that it's forbidden to have wood in the temple. Now I'm making a sheira, which is the wood in the temple. So if you had it on Friday and it's not like a stage goes up and goes down, so people may think about the Asherah. Others they say the reason is the cheka means is that when you have a miracle, one of the things as children how we visualize miracles is a miracle is a miracle. Once you're in miracle mode, there's no restrictions, right? If it's a miracle. But we learn a lot of times in Torah, miracles also have rules. What was the miracle of the Beis Hamikdash? The miracle of the Beis Hamikdash was that there was always space, so that they would stand and it was kind of crowded. But when they bowed, if you're standing and it's crowded, you can't bow, right? Because bowing takes up at least 3 times the amount of space you need to stand, right? To crouch down. So one of the miracles of the Beis Hamikdash was that when they stood, it was standing room only, and when they bowed, there was space to bow. How's that possible? It was a miracle. So the Yerushalmi says, what's it mean the chekelei azara? Because they need space for the miracle, and the wood is taking up the space because the stage takes up a big part of the azara of the courtyard. So it's going to affect the miracle of standing and bowing. But if it's a miracle, why couldn't the miracle just override whatever the limitations are of the stage? So from here we see in these other places also when it talks about the Jewish people going through the desert, Rashi brings over there also, asks the question that how did the fire travel through the desert when they traveled? The fire that was always on the Mizbeach, so it crouched down and they had to put a covering. The whole fire was a miracle. So what's the question how it traveled? If it's a miracle, it's a miracle. We see that even miracles have limitations. So here they didn't, so according to Yerushalmi, they didn't build the stage in the Azara on Friday because it would affect the miracle of the bowing of the space. Although then if there's a miracle, you could just, whatever, the miracle could override this problem as well. But that's obviously how, we don't really understand miracles, so we don't understand the restrictions of miracles. The Alter Rebbe always used to say that when it comes, the more you know, the more complicated it is. When a child says God, doesn't think at this level, that level, say their stalshus in the chain of creation, outside the chain of creation. A child knows when I talk to God, it's a love midaisav. God can do anything, and the Alter Rebbe says that's the most simplistic belief of God. Because the more a person studies in Kabbalistic studies and Hasidic studies in Torah, there's midais. What does it mean? Love midaisav. It gets complicated. The kid doesn't know all that. The kid says God. God means God can do anything, and that's the truth, really. But also there's this, it filters down into restrictions, even miracles. But we don't go further. Why don't we go further? The Rashi says, Tamim and Farish Gemara. The Gemara will explain why. Okay. Let's just see Rabbi Stein. I just want to say one thing that again, the Rashi writes that the same thing applies to the miracle that we don't fast Shabbos, we push off to Sunday. That applies to Tisha B'Av and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Asar B'Teves, the 10th of Teves. And the question is, why doesn't Rashi mention some Gedalia? The Beis Yosef in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim Tav Kuf Nun, says he brings the Havadur of the Avud Haram. Avud Haram, it was a great Rishon. There's a lot of, he's quoted in many fantastic ideas of tradition. So Avodah Ram says, Shekasa B'Ilchos Tainus, he writes his opinion in the laws of Tainus, that if the 10th of Tevis falls out on Shabbos, because it says Be'etzem Yom Hazeh, you would fast on the Shabbos, and the Beis Yosef, who quotes the Avodah Ram, writes, V'lo yadaitu minayin leizeh. It means he has a pasuk to support, but he says, where does he have, what's his Messiah, his tradition for this? Okay. Most of the opinions is that when Rashi says again that why can't you do hakal on Shabbos is not because of the stage, it's because of the children. You can't bring the children on Shabbos, and that when Rashi continues to say that the Yerushalmi, he's quoting a second opinion. I just want to bring down. There's another. It's also brought down that reason why we can't do the hakel on Shabbos is because they would blow the shofar, and that wouldn't be allowed on Shabbos. Although we quoted about the shofar, not so simple. And he says the Rambam writes that in the Talmud that the instruments that we used for hakel is the reason why we can't do hakel on Shabbos, which are not doich the Shabbos. The Ran is the one who quotes that he explains the Yerushalmi that what's the problem with the bima being in the courtyard is because it affects the miracle of that they stood kind of squeezed, and then when they bowed, they had plenty of space. Another reason is he says is because that it's brought down. The Carbonated writes that also there was more activity, that to put up a stage for an extra day affects the activities. Friday, people were bringing karbanos. It's not a time to take up space in the Azara. Okay, so therefore, and also I quoted, it's brought down in the Yerushalmi also because the Asherah, the problem of having wood in the temple is also part of the problem. Okay. So let's just learn Rabbi Stein's thoughts on what we learned so far. Rashi Rabbeinu Yonatan explained with regard to these. What does it mean be'elu? The problem is be'elu. What does be'elu mean? In other words, the various times of reading the Megillah. One advances the time but does not postpone it. However, the word these in plural is slightly difficult according to the interpretation because to say elu for Megillah, you could, even though there's many different scenarios, you could say you would use a singular term, not a plural term, in the rules of diktuk. However, some explain based on the Jerusalem Talmud that the Sefta that the reference is to the reading of the Megillah and the collection of the shekel. This week is Shabbos Shkolim, right? We're coming up to Parshas Shkolim, the Shabbos. So when would they collect the shekel? Also gets pushed off, gets backdated, it gets advanced, not postponed. For communal offerings, so says the Meiri. Others explain that the word these refers to the residents of the village and the small cities, talking about the different peoples when they go forward. All right. What is the Atzei Kohanim? What does it mean about the families of of priests donated the wood? It is explained in Tractate of Tainus 28a. At the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, meaning the times of the building of the second temple went through more than a few upgrades. Especially the famous last one was of Herod, which actually made the temple most beautiful. But in the beginning, it was very minimal. So in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, certain families volunteered to bring the wood offering on set days of the year, since there was a lack of funds in the temple, and the temple fund didn't have enough money to buy the wood. Although after a while there was no longer a financial need for this, these families maintained the practice of donating the wood and rejoicing on these days. Again, this shows you of chibuv a mitzvah, and this also shows you there's an idea. This comes into place a lot of times in shuls. I just want to bring this, not exactly connected to what we're talking about now, but this idea comes into shul sometimes. You have situations of a shul that in the early days of the shul or the community were relying on certain people to fund it, and as things grew, people say, okay, why does this and this person retain the schutz of this kibbud? Opening the ark, giving the Torah, whatever the kibbud is, people take issue with, and they forget that when things weren't so easy, and before other people showed up, and the shul was in dire need, this person stood up and was there for the shul. And you don't just, when things get easy, say, okay, you lost your merit. We see from the Beis Hamikdash that the families that supported the wood in the hard days, they retained, and other families that wanted to come up and say, oh, we want to have a day of wood. No, you weren't there then. That doesn't mean it was your fault. Doesn't mean that you were there and you said no, but they were there. That's the fact, and that stays with kol davar shebekdusha, and we have to respect that. And that comes up a lot of times, issues in shuls. As for the reason why the bringing of the wood is not advanced, some explain that the donation of wood is viewed as a vow. Okay, so the question is, why can't we backdate, advance to Friday to family. So there's two reasons. One is that a vow. The thing about a vow is vow kicks in on its day. If you're fulfilling a vow early, you haven't fulfilled the vow when it kicks in. So therefore, in order to fulfill the vow, it's better to postpone the vow than advance the vow. That has a specific time that is supposed to be fulfilled, and therefore donating the wood before the appropriate time will not be fulfillment of the vow. So this is Rashi and Rambam. The Ran and Rashi's commentary that appears in the Rif on the Alphas suggest that if this time were advanced, it would interfere with the dates that were set for the others that bring the wood offering. I mean, if you're going backwards, you're affecting other people's donations. Okay. What is the hakel? So Reb Steinzal says, Rabbi Evan Yisrael says, the mitzvah of hakel is detailed in the Torah in Devarim 31:10-13. This practice took place on the day after the first festival day of Sukkot, but not like Rashi. Some say it took place on the conclusion of the last festival day of Sukkot, so says Rashi and the Jerusalem Talmud. They would build a stage of wood in the courtyard. The king would stand upon it and read from the book of Devarim to the entire nation, men, women, and children. Rashi explains that the reason this is not done on Shabbos is that the ceremony requires that the children be brought as well, and there's a concern that the prohibition against carrying and taking out items on Shabbos will be violated. That maybe people would carry on Shabbos. So the Reb Steinsaltz learns that that's pshat in Rashi. A different explanation is cited in the Jerusalem Talmud, which maintains that the reason of the hakel did not take place on Shabbos is due to the horn blast accompanying the ceremony. Alternatively, is because they needed to build a stage on that same day. They had to build it on the same day. They couldn't build it earlier because of it taking up space, either in the miracle or in the just stamp crowding the Azara. He quotes the Rambam, if the day assembly falls on Shabbos, it's postponed until after Shabbos. Okay. Now the Mishnah continues. Even though we say that on Purim, we're makdim, we do things on Shabbos earlier. According to Rebbe, it's Thursday. According to Rav and the custom, we do it on the Friday. Mutar behesed v'tainis matanis lavyon. You are still allowed to, it's mutter, it's permitted to do hesped. The question is what hesped means. Not so simple. You're allowed to eulogize, you're allowed to fast, and matanis lavyonim. Now, the word mutarim means it's permitted, not obligatory. And the question is the permitted only referring to the eulogy and the fasting, or is the word permitted also affecting the gifts to the poor? We understood until now that it's not permitted, it's obligatory. That when you read the Megillah, you have to give the Matanos Avyonim, because that's what they're waiting to get the Matanos Avyonim when you're reading the Megillah. That's when the poor people come. You know that everyone's gathering. It seems from here that it's only permitted, not obligatory. Rabbi Yehuda says, here Rabbi Yehuda, we quoted this opinion earlier. Rabbi Yehuda says that the only times the villagers could read earlier is if they gather on Thursdays and Mondays. But if there's no gathering anyways on Thursdays and Mondays, what's the point? And then they have to read in its proper time. Okay. Now, let's see Rashi about Matanos Lavyonim. Sorry, Reb Steinsaltz. There's no more Rashi on this Mishnah. So the Matanos Lavyonim, Rabbi Steinsaltz says, on the same day of the Megillah is read, even when the reading is advanced to a different day, gifts for the poor are collected and distributed. So says the Shulchan Aruch or Chaim. Doesn't say permitted. It says it as in a way of obligatory. That's when you give the gifts to the poor, and that's the custom. We give the gifts to the poor on a Purim Meshulash, and Purim when it falls on Shabbos, on the 15th of Shabbos, and we read on the Thursday night, Friday. That's when you give the gifts on the Friday. From the language of the Rambam, it is clear that he understands the phrase to mean that on the day of the reading the Megillah, one may bring gifts to the poor and thereby fulfilling the obligation. Conversely, some explain that his intention is that on that day one is exempt from giving gifts to the poor, meaning to say that you don't have to. If you want to, you can, that's really the Lashon HaMishnah. The Lashon HaMishnah says mutarim. It groups together eulogies, fasts, and gifts to the poor. What is the gift support? Every person is obligated on Purim to give at least 2 gifts to 2 poor people. It means you have to give 2 gifts to 2 poor people, 1 gift to each. One fulfills this obligation with a gift worth a pruta. Okay, so Reb Steinsaltz quotes the halacha of how much you have to give as a pruta. Prutas today is, I think I checked online, is about a few cents. However, that's not the mitzvah is to give. We try to give enough for a poor person to buy a suda, a meal. One must give gifts when with his own money, although he may add from the money that he tithes for charity. Okay, here's the halacha. The halacha is, for instance, a person wants to gift the poor. Is he allowed to, or she allowed to gift the poor from their obligatory meiser, from their meiser money, from the tithing money? So halachically, for the actual minimal amount of a pruta, again, we're talking about a few cents, that can't be out of your tithing money. That has to come from your own money. You could add to the gift with tithing money, with your tzedakah money, but not the obligation. The obligation has to be your own money. So it says the Magen Avram citing the Maril, which is the father of all Ashkenazi minhagim. It is appropriate to give the money on the day of Purim, enabling the poor person to use it on Purim. The Rambam writes that it's preferable to give additional gifts to the poor than to send additional portions. It means a person may say, okay, I'm going to give the gift to the poor a few dollars, but I want to give out a beautiful shalchmanas. So today, people say, I want to spend thousands of dollars on my shalchmanas. Everyone's going to see how original I am and how, barchav I am. Rambam says, never mind that. Do minimal on matanas lavyonim and even sudas yamtiv and give more money to the poor. Okay, so we finished the Mishnah. I just want to, before we continue, a little bit of Gemara. I'm going to bring down some other points over here. It says over here, the Sfas Emes again, the Ger Rebbe says, it doesn't say if he's arguing on the Rambam or says that the Rambam's misunderstood, but he says it doesn't work. You have to give, halachically, you have to give the gifts to the poor on the day of the reading. So if we read on a Thursday, Friday, then you gift on Thursday, Friday, meaning even if the Purim falls out on Shabbos. Well, the Gabi Sudas Purim. Okay, so now we're going into halacha about the Sudas Purim. So this is the problem. The problem is that, again, the Purim, the 15th falls out on Shabbos. We divide the Purim into three. Reading of the Megillah and gifts to the poor are on Friday, Thursday night, Friday. Shabbos, we have the reading of Megillah. Of Amalek and Alanisim, and then gifts, Matanas Lavyonim, and Meshalach Manas, and Sudas Yamtiv is on Sunday. But the Mishnah says Ma'achron, you're not allowed to push off. So he says, Lagabi Sudas Purim, Isa Yishalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud says, the Ma'achron Eisai Lachar Shabbos. We do the meal on the Sunday. Why? So because Friday is hard to do it, anyways, and Shabbos is anyways. You have Sudas Shabbos, right? So in order to make that Sudas Purim Nikeres, that we see clearly we're celebrating the Purim, we put it off to another day. One should not say that you're fulfilling your obligation of the Sudas Yamtiv of Purim on Shabbos. The Ritva says, so says the Rash and Ran, how could you push it off to Sunday? It says V'lo Yavre, you're not allowed to push over. That's the reason why Purim doesn't get pushed off. So how could we push off the meal to Sunday? So, and we have to say that it also applies to Simcha, which is the obligations of the meal, the joy, because it says Niskarim V'nasim, and we learn Niskarim V'nasim include the Megillah and the Simcha, and both of them it says Lo Yaver, you shouldn't pass. So the Ritva writes, the Ritva's opinion that what does it mean that you do it afterwards means on Shabbos. His opinion is you don't do it on Sunday, you do it on Shabbos. That's when you're supposed to have. That's why you should know that in your Shalayim when you hear everyone's talking about a 3-day Yom Tiv. So we know that on Shabbos you're also supposed to do more than a regular Shabbos. Why? Because there's the opinion of the Ritva, and some say the Ran and the Ra'ah agree with that also, that you're supposed to do Shabbos the meal. So you have to have it also on Shabbos. But the others disagree. But we know the custom is not like that. I'm just bring down the Rambam. It says that also it seems like from the Rambam you do the meal on Shabbos. Also seems like the Jerusalem Talmud is in a single opinion, not in the opinion of. But anyways, he quotes the Shulchan Aruch, writes Shachol Tesvav B'Shabbos Sudis Legas Be'em Aleph. After everything said, after the Ritva, the Ran, the Jerusalem Talmud, there's opinions that right, it's just a single opinion. But we look in the Shulchan Aruch. He writes in Taf Reish Pei Ches that the Shachol Tesvav B'Shabbos, that if the 15th falls on Shabbos, Sudin Nehegas Be'em Aleph, if we do the meal on the Sunday, and the Mishnah Brura also says that he quotes Yishami, and again, there's many opinions. What about the Mashalach Manos? Again, we learned Mashalach Manos is you can't. There's a question if you're allowed to give Mashalach Manos on Shabbos because it's Kinyan. We asked if it's Kinyan, not a Kinyan. So he says the Tosafos Yom Tov says that when you do it, and whenever you do the meal is when you do the Shalach Manos. So that's why the minhag is. The bottom line is to put it all together. The halacha brought down from the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura Paskins that the meal is done on the Sunday, then the Shalach Manos is done on the Sunday. However, there's plenty of opinions that hold that we're supposed to, the Rambam and the Ritva, that we're supposed to do the meal on Shabbos, and therefore I think the custom is that we still add to the meal on Shabbos. Okay, let's try to get 15 minutes of Talmud. Tana Asar Batlanim Shebei Sakneses. So we learned Gemara Asar Batlanim Shebei Sakneses. Where are these 10 idlers? The 10 idlers have to be found in this synagogue. What does it mean that they're idlers? So Rashi is of the opinion, not that they're available, but that they don't have work. Seemingly means they're unemployed in any other employment. And they collect they get their funds, they get their salaries. Nizunim means from the word mazon, their food means their salaries, comes from the community, from the tax, from the city. So they should always be available in the shul. The Amar Mar, because we learned in Masechtas Brachas, Kivin Shabakadosh Baruch Hu, the Beis HaKnesses Ve'ein Moitze Shem Asara. If God walks into the shul and doesn't find 10 people, he disappoints him. So they're showing him right that Achshav Shenogo Am Lahashkim Laharav Beis HaKnesses Dina Kilu Yesham Yud Batlanim. That the halacha is that today that we have set shuls, and there's at least a minion that shows up, that's considered 10 batlanim. That's enough to make it a big city. From this, we see a few things. Everyone knows that Asiri, and everyone knows the idea of being part of the first people that come to shul. What's the important thing? Because when God comes to the shul, He wants to know that Chaim is going to be there, and Avi is going to be there, and Z is going to be there. He wants to know that His regulars show up. And it says if God comes to shul and doesn't see His regulars, he's wondering, where's the regulars? Where are you? So there's an Indian to be from the people that God could rely on, and the community could rely on, that you're the people that come to the minyan. Okay, minyan people. The Gemara says, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, my timer. What's the reason why we have to go, we advance and we don't postpone? Amr Abba Amr Shmuel Amr Kol Lo Yaver, because the pasuk says you're not allowed to go past. And that's why we never go past. We've already discussed this from the beginning of the chapter of the Megillah, that we never postpone. We always advance when it comes to the Megillah, because the verse says V'lo Yaver, you can't go past, and this is why it creates the whole question of how we're allowed to make the meal on the 16th when Shabbos falls on the 15th. But Amr Rabbi Abba Amr Shmuel, Rabbi Abba says in the name of Shmuel. Rabbi Abba says in the name of Shmuel, Minayin Shei Moinin Yamim L'Shanim Shnemer L'Chotshi Hashana. Okay, so once we already quoted a saying of Rabbi Abba in his name of Shmuel, so we're quoting a second statement that he says like this: how do we know that in Jewish that we don't count days to make a year? If someone says I'm committing a year, so we count the months, we don't count the days. What's the difference? The difference is that the solar years have 11 extra days, so we don't count the extra days. We're not concerned with days. When we say a year, what defines a year? 12 months. If you're lacking, and there's also a problem with how the days work out. If there's a leap year, not a leap year. If there's a leap month, not a leap month, we don't count days. We count months. Once it's a month, that's a full year. It means once it's 12 months, it's a year, or 13 months if it's a leap year. So the Gemara is, how do we know we're not concerned with the days? We're concerned with the months. You're going to Amar, for instance, where is this applicable? Where is this a concern? When a person makes a vow, the person says, I'm not going to taste wine for a year. Moine Yud Beis Chodesh, you count 12 months. Miyayim liyayim. So if it's a Chodesh Nisan, goes until the end of Adar. V'im Nadar Be'echad Nisan. For instance, you made a vow not to drink wine for a year on the first of Nisan. Asher Ad Echad Nisan, you're prohibited to drink wine until the first of Nisan of the next year. Haba. Even though in the solar year you're missing 11 days because every lunar year is short 11 days. That's why we leap the years. That there's 11 days of the solar year more than the lunar year. Or not every year, even in a lunar year, they're not always the same amount of days. Because we know the rule is that there's no less and no more than 4. You always have to have a certain amount of full months, means 30 days or 29 days. But sometimes we have Cheshvan and Kislev could both be 29 or both 30 or both 129, 130. So that even a lunar year has about 3 days. There's 3 days on and off. So Rashi says that's also a person says, well, maybe this year is all a whole bunch of cheseirim. Every year is only 29. Every month, or every optional month is 29. Cheshvan is 29. Kislev is 29. And then I'm lacking a few days of what a proper lunar year should be. We say, no, we don't count days, we count months. If the month is 29 days, then you fulfilled your vow when the first of Sivat Nisan comes. Reb Stein's just going to explain this. A year only considers a year when calculated by the number of the whole months, even though the solar year has 11 days. He quotes the Rashi that the has 11 more days than the lunar year. Solidity days are not added. Rather, we wait until there's a full month's difference between the calendar, and then we add the leap year. But we don't add it in the vows. We don't add every year 11 days. We wait till we gather 3 years, three years of 11 days, and that's the system of the leap year. And because it's 11 days, like we learned in Rosh Hashanah, sometimes we leap the year every 3 years, every 2 years. Okay. V'Rabbanan de Kesari, the rabbis in Kesaria, say in the name of Rab Abba. I think Rab Abba was if I'm not mistaken, was one of the Rabbanim of Kesari. Okay, they go further. How do we know that when it comes to we don't count days to years, we count months to years. But what about hours to months? Means why? If a person says 30 days, you have to wait 30 days. Where do we have the pasuk at Chodesh Yom? So the Balkaris would know, Rabavi, at Chodesh Yom actually has nothing to do with it's just when God tells it's when God tells the Jewish people how many days they're going to eat meat before they got the punishment of overeating the meat and they died from the meat. So it said the Torah says tells Moshe in Parshas Baloscha ad Chodesh Yomim. So we see we count 30 days, we don't count hours. We count days, we don't count hours. Why? Because the lunar month is 29 and a half, or even a little more than a half hours. So we don't those hours. That's why we have sometimes 29 days, sometimes 30 days, like we learned in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. So we don't calculate the hours, and also we don't calculate the Rosh Chodesh. Never is the middle of the day. Rosh Chodesh is always a day. Sometimes we'll have it on the 29th, sometimes the 30th. But we don't count hours; we count days. Okay. But where does it come? Where does it make a difference? Okay, guy no amr zay git khaim lay basi mi kanat khodesh ze it khodesh ze va hay khodesh khaser u ba mkhshay khaliyem khaftas enoy madain hu betay khodesh ari khod shalavan khaftas yem makhs. Where does it come? Where does it make a difference? This is you have to understand in uncertain times. This is they did this in it says the Chayil Beis David, right? So when you went out to war, you went into uncertain times. The husband didn't want to leave the wife to be an aguna, to be a woman who can't get married because they don't know what happened to the husband. If a husband goes missing, that's an aguna. We don't know if the husband died, so she can't remarry, and we don't know if he's still alive. So when people do what they would do is when they went in uncertain situations, they would divorce their wives. That's why Bathsheba wasn't married, because Uriah. They divorced their wives when they went out to war, just in case they got captured, what have you. They would divorce their wives, and then when they came back, they would take them back. So if a person says to his wife, I'm going away for 30 days. If I don't show up in 30 days, then the divorce kicks in. Means it's a conditional divorce. What happens if he's unfortunate where it comes in, it's an early month, and they did the new month a day a little earlier, and he came in after that time, but within the 29 and a half days, so it's too late. She's divorced. It doesn't mean that he can't remarry her, but if whatever the consequences of if she decides to remarry, she doesn't want to remarry, doesn't want to get married to you, whatever, she wants to collect her ksuva, she's divorced. And you can't say, well, I have a few hours if you're counting technically. Okay, so Reb Steinzat says these principles are relevant in various ways. They impact the setting of the times of the calendar, such that years are only composed of complete months. Likewise, months are not counted from the hour of the new moon, but rather consists of complete days. The calendar, in turn, impacts the halachot of vows and contracts, which depends upon months and years. So divorce is a contract or vows. So anything that's dependent on time, we don't say, well, I have a few more hours. In Torah, we don't count hours, we count days. Okay, let's just do one more little piece. And then we're going to get into the complicated question of the machlekes Beisham Beis Hillel. The first argument of Torah Shebal Peh is the Chagiga. But let's Avizmane Atzik Hanim Tishba v'Chagiga. But so that's the Megillah gets backdated, gets advanced, but not postponed. But the gift for the sacrifices and gifts of the wood and Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av that falls on Shabbos, or the Chagiga, the holiday, or Hakel Ma'achrim, we push off the Makdim, we don't advance. Tisha B'Av Akdume Pranius Makdime. Why don't we just fast on the 8th day, on Friday, instead of waiting till Sunday? So he says, Akdume Pranius Makdime. Why should we advance misfortune? We wait till the day comes. Chagiga v'Hakel, and why don't we advance the Chagiga sacrifice, the holiday sacrifice, or the Hakel? Because again, you have to have a chiyuv, you have to have an obligation for it. The obligation didn't kick in yet. If the obligation doesn't kick in, so you can't do it. Rashi says it hasn't kicked in the obligation. This is a rule Rashi is saying. The rule Rashi is saying is that when an obligation kicks in, you can't say, well, I did it yesterday. Because you weren't obligated yesterday. Very nice you brought a sacrifice where you all got together and said the Torah, but that's not when the obligation was. So when the obligation kicks in, that's when you're obligated to do it. So it's better to postpone than to advance. So too, the gift of the wood was a neder, although it's not obligatory for everyone, but for that family, they the part of the benefit was also the responsibility. And it was like a vow, and they had an obligation to fulfill their vow of giving the donation to the wood, and it didn't kick in until the day. So if it didn't kick in, so they didn't fulfill their vow. Before we close off, I just want to say, okay, there was one more thing over here. Okay, I was wondering this question. The Turi Evan asks why Rashi uses the example of the month of divorce and doesn't just say like Rabbi Steinzalt said, which is anything, a vow, whatever, the vows, whatever. If you fulfill your vow, you don't fulfill your vow. It all depends on. It doesn't make a difference if the question is years or months. It means if we're counting hours or we're counting days. Is once a complete time is finished, then you've fulfilled your vow, or so why does he have to give another example? He doesn't give the answer over here, but he says that it's discussed. Okay, all right, we're going to stop over here because now next we go into the machlokes of. We're going to get into the machlokes of the laws of smicha, of how we do what's this machlokes Beisham Beis Hillel. It's really the first machlokes of Yesi ben Yezer and Yesi Yisur Shalayim, the machlokes of bringing the sacrifices on on the holiday that ended up being the split in the Jewish people that almost took things down because of this argument of the Chagiga. We'll get to Be'ezus Hashem with God's help next week. So good Shabbos, everyone, and we're already getting ready for Shabbos, and also Shavuot Tov. And I think next week is going to be Rosh Chodesh Adar, so I think we're already into the next month. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.